Welcome, everybody. This is the KubeVirt community meeting, September 16th, 2020. First on the agenda, Daniel Hiller has a note about IP tables.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I was just wondering, because we had to switch back to using IP tables for the KubeVirt CI provider, which I forgot to mention last week. It was a switch from IPVS back to IP tables. And I was just asking what the general opinion on that is, and if there are any objections on that.
So IPVS, I'm not familiar with that.
So honestly, me neither. I'm not a network specialist, so I was asking also on that. So as I understand it, there are two modes for using for a kube proxy or for configuration, where exposed services are either exposed via IPVS, IP virtual servers, or via IP tables. And yeah, honestly, I understood that IPVS should be more beneficial throughput-wise, but yeah, that's just what I read. So I don't know.
I mean, the issue with IPVS was that there was a bug in IPVS or in Kubernetes handling those, right?
True.
Yeah, I mean the change doesn't matter. Like, all we care about is that the services work. There is nothing that we do that would be necessarily closely connected with the way they work. We just need them to function, and it's handled on the node, not even in the pod. So we as a KubeVirt have no relation with it. So I think it's all right to switch it and move to IPVS once they fix it. Maybe they went from IP tables a little too early.
So this is a temporary fix in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, if Kubernetes decided that they will switch to default implementation, then, I mean, once it's stable and usable, then we can switch.
Yeah, because I guess my concern here is that IP tables is a legacy tool at this point. NF tables is the tool we're supposed to be using for firewalls for several releases now. It all depends. You know, temporary solutions are always permanent. We'll just continue using IP tables, I guess. Since we have complete control of the environment, but I don't know if that'll be an issue, but.
Yeah, I agree with you. We should ditch IP tables as soon as we can. I'm hoping this will be only temporary, and the reason is that we found a bug that was related to the IPVS. I think that was it was connected, and Kubernetes upstream took it, and they are fixing it. So if this was indeed related, then we can, move to IPVS in 120, hopefully. But I should probably set a tracker or reminder somewhere so we just don't leave it in forever. I will do that.
Okay. So when we're doing this at the KubeVirt CI level, that's a container. So do we need to be cognizant of whatever the host is using, correct?
Let me see. Well, sorry for stammering. So this, like us choosing IP tables or IPVS, this IP tables or IPVS is running on the node of the cluster, which is a VM for us on KubeVirt CI. So if we ever get an OS as base for this node that doesn't have IP tables, we would just explode right on the conformance test. And then we have like a real action item to tackle. And it should not, it has no dependencies on the host or on your laptop or whatever is the machine you're running KubeVirt CI on.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, if we're running it at the node, then that's fine. I was just imagining, because by the way, if you run IP tables code inside of a container and the host is using NF tables, it will crash. So we do need to at least think about that if we were mixing environments. But in this case, because it's running on the node, there shouldn't be an issue.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that subject? Thank you for raising it, Daniel. And moving on to E2E tests, and I'll turn it over to Roman.
Hi. So I spent some time on finally making our CI test to do a little bit faster again, since we are now, running all tests takes now in CI, just the tests, I don't know, 3 hours or something, or 4 sometimes. And we intentionally create a lot of tests with zeros and alpine, which means small images and everything, and fast boot time and short migration time. And with that in mind, I was able to start running Kubernetes or KubeVirt tests in parallel for 3 tests on our CI system without any issues. And this means this saves for every lane 40 to 60 minutes. I'm not done there. I think the PR is in a state where we can merge it. There are much more tests which we can parallelize. But I think it's in a good enough state to have some benefit. And I put the pull request on hold right now to present it basically here and write something to KubeVirt dev and make sure that the guidelines for it.
Okay, so we're running tests, like just random functional tests. Are they all from an individual module, or how are the tests selected that we're running?
So I went through all tests and marked them with serial if they can't be run in parallel, and I fixed some minor issues in some tests which prevented them for no good reason to run in parallel. That's how it works. So if a test can't be run in parallel, so all the tests I did not review yet or change, I just put on the top describe a tag serial, which means that all tests inside that are not executed in parallel. And for all the other test files, I went through all the tests and marked only these as serial, which can't be run in parallel.
Okay, well that fully answers my concern, because there are obviously some tests that you should not be running with anything else. If, for instance, it's modifying the cluster config, that wouldn't be helpful to run at the same time as something else.
So
okay,
or we can run pretty much everything in parallel except there are some tests with some PVCs. I think we could make them all parallel, but it's not possible right now. And I explicitly marked all tests with Fedora as serial because they need between 500 and 1 gigabyte of RAM. Yeah, and so that is potentially too much.
Sorry to cut you off, Roman. There is also a bunch of networking tests that they follow the pattern that they set up the VMs and before all, and then they just utilize them. And we are moving them to be like 1 VM per each but it's not yet there. So
yeah, so yeah, right. I didn't touch networking tests. I just put the serial on top of all those files.
Gotcha. Thanks.
But still, there are 250 tests right now, and we can run them so locally on the NCI, I can run 250 out of our 580 tests in less than half an hour, which is good.
Have you tried to push the limits on the host so we can run even more tests in parallel?
I have it on my list to do more tests in parallel. I tried it once, and there it looked a little bit strange. It looked like it didn't really get much faster, but I didn't look too close. It was just one small experiment, and then I immediately went back to make it work with 3. Really
understood. Just wondering if the next year, when we get like twice as fast CPUs, we can just bump the number.
Yeah, there are other things which we can definitely improve, which would help the parallelize efforts too. And this is mostly right now we use Docker and Docker to bring up the clusters in CI, which produces a lot of disk I/O. I think that's the next thing to tackle. If we get rid of that, it will allow us also to run much more clusters in parallel with parallel tests, which may mean that we can, for instance, then also just double the lanes and say we run on one lane, we run, for instance, for Kubernetes 1.16, 2 lanes, one with the parallelized tests, and in parallel the other one for the infra test, which you can't parallelize, so that we end up with, I don't know, 1.5 hours until you have the full feedback or something. So it's definitely possible without, probably even possible without the need for more resources. But additional work needs to be done.
And well, did you need to change something on KubeVirt CI? So I mean, if we bump the number of CPUs used for the QEMU VMs we have there, would it help by any chance?
Sure, we can pass through more resources to our clusters. We could actually do that. We may have to look then. Right now, it's a kind of balanced. It's a trade-off between how many clusters can we schedule on each node and don't overload the nodes, right? So if we give them more CPUs, we may not be able to schedule so many clusters on the node right now. I mean,
Gotcha. Thanks.
if they have more resources, we could definitely run more in parallel. More memory, more resources, and we can run pretty much everything we have in parallel.
So I guess this is something more of a comment than a question, but this would mean that any test that, for instance, counts the number of things, like the number of templates or number of VMs, is probably a bad pattern now because we no longer know what's going on.
So good that you bring up the question. First, one thing, what I want to change with this pull request is first that we would now think when we write tests about first they need to run in parallel. There should be an excuse why they are not running in parallel for new tests. And it's actually fairly simple. 98% of the tests which I made run parallel, I didn't have to change the name in any way. So we're following these guides already pretty good, but now one would really need to provide an excuse why a Fedora VM is needed or why it is come to run in parallel. And second, I mean, I extra took care that everything which we did right now in the tests pretty much just continues working. So it's like we see on every test node, it works like this. Right now we have three namespaces, right? We have the operator test namespace, the KubeVirt default test name, and the KubeVirt alternative test name. And every node has now its own namespaces. So we were referencing these variables before already. They just now point every node to a different namespace, and they can just operate independent of each other. So you can very well just create the VMs, count the VMs in your namespace like you did before. There is no overlap in any way. You only have to be careful when you create the resources outside of namespaces. But inside namespace, you can do whatever you did before.
Okay, so each test is created in a new namespace then.
Not really.
I misunderstood then.
So right now we run in serial all our tests, and they all execute one after another in these three namespaces I mentioned. Right? There is no overlap. If I would just run the tests in parallel, they would all override each other in the same namespace. So every parallel execution node gets its own set of namespaces. So in the test, you would still reference your normal namespace, KubeVirt namespace test default variable, which contains the name. But it would point you, depending on where the test got scheduled, to a different namespace. But that's transparent for the test, basically. It doesn't make a change there. And we have, if we run three tests in parallel, we have three namespaces per each parallel test execution. Does it make more sense now?
Crystal clear. Okay, so that's why things that are, say, for instance, in the KubeVirt install namespace absolutely cannot be parallelized because you've left your namespace.
Yeah, if you need to change the KubeVirt install namespace, this is very likely an infra test or a config change test, and this is something which you can parallelize.
Got it. That makes perfect sense. Thank you. That's actually fantastic. Does anybody else have any comments or questions on that?
How much improvement in the execution time for all test suite you expect to be at the end?
Sorry, could you repeat your question? I couldn't clearly hear you.
Yeah, sure. I'm asking how much improvement do you expect for running parallel tests to be?
How much? What?
how much improvement in the
Improvement.
runtime?
How much?
Okay.
Yeah.
So right now, as the pull request is right now, it already saves on the Kubernetes 118 lane 1 hour. And on the Kubernetes 117 and 116 lanes, the VMs are actually starting a little bit faster. That's, for instance, something which we should investigate because it was surprising. So I could only save roughly 40 minutes there, but still 40 minutes. And I did not really put much effort in parallelizing the tests or try to fix some tests which we could parallelize. It was just the first set, first half. I expect that we can probably parallelize 3/4 to 4/5 of all tests. And yeah, so, but that's kind of a guess. I mean, we have a lot of infra tests and we need them too. And we can't parallelize these.
Very nice. For 1.16 lane, the difference from what I know is use a different CNI there. Use Flannel. And for 17 and above, we use Calico.
That could be an issue, but this 117 lane is also fast. Just the 118 is slower. But yeah, but it could still be Calico.
Okay. Are there any other topics to raise today? All right. Well, with that, thank you, everybody, and see you next week.
Bye.